Hey there. Welcome back to my kitchen, and thank you for coming. My name is Cindy, and today I'm going to show you how to make a sourdough starter healthy again after being neglected in the refrigerator for a few weeks with no feedings. Now, when I saw the starter, I smelled it, and it was like, ooh, PU. It smelled like, I don't know, like acetone, vinegary smell. And I knew immediately that it was too acidic from being hungry for so long. And a little bit of hooch had formed at the top, which is an alcohol that is produced. And I poured that off. But I was able to save just under 20 grams of starter from the jar. And I put that in a clean jar, which is on the scale. What we are going to do is feed this starter from peak to peak, which will probably translate into 2 feedings a day. And I'm going to do it at a 1:2 ratio, meaning 1 part starter, 2 parts water, 2 parts flour. And I'm using rye flour because it's a whole grain, and it will give the starter more food to eat, and it will help things along more quickly. So to the starter that I saved from the fridge, I teared out my scale, and I'm adding 50 grams of filtered room temperature water. You can also use spring water. Although they say tap water is not recommended, I do use it sometimes, but I wanted to really stick with the rules for while I made this starter healthy again. And next, I'm going to stir that up. You don't have to. You can go right to adding the flour, which I end up doing near the end of this video. And to the water and starter mixture, I am going to add 50 grams of the organic rye flour. I do this very, very slowly. I'm sorry about that. I don't know why I was being so careful. I already know that about 2.5 of these scoops is 50 grams, but for some reason I'm being very careful. So someday here we'll get to 50 grams. Bear with me, folks. Oh my goodness. Finally. Now I'm going to stir that up. And the rye flour, I remember very quickly, is very sticky. It makes for a very thick, sticky starter. In fact, I'm going to move the scale out of the way and really get to this. Really get down to it. I love the spatula. It is stiff enough to give the starter a good stir, and it's also flexible enough on the ends to scrape the sides down. I'm adding just, I would say maybe a teaspoon of water. You just add water a little bit at a time, and it turns out that this was plenty. You can always add water, but you can't take away, right? So I'm going to clean off the spatula and start to make the starter even on the top and scrape down the sides of the jar. This is so I can see how much the starter rises. I just happen to love clean sourdough starter jars. I'm a little bit picky about it, and I will often just start a new jar with each feeding. Sometimes I don't, but I usually do. And this is thick. And now I'm going to take a towel and wipe around the rim once again, because I'm a little bit fastidious about this, and wipe out the jar so I can see through it and it's not gross. I will tell you that this effort has resulted in me having 0 problems with mold or bacteria ever since I started this, which has been a 1.5 years or so. You put the lid on loosely because gases need to escape, and I placed my rubber band all the way around at the level of the starter. Now, this is going to go in a warm place. I highly recommend not using the oven with the light on. That's a popular idea. But I'll say, unless you live alone, and even if you do live alone, invariably, someone's going to turn on that oven and bake your starter and ruin it. So I have found a warm place in my house on the top of my range hood because I keep the lights on underneath, and you can see that the starter doubled in just a few hours on day one. Look at those bubbles. Now taking another clean jar, I'm going to remove 25 grams of starter. And you might be saying, why not 50? Well, because I'm trying to get the acidic starter out of this. So the least amount I can use, the better. In fact, I could even use less than 25 grams, but it's just easier to remember. And then to that, I'm going to add 50 grams of the filtered room temperature water. Need to tear out the scale first. And I got it exactly. And we'll take the spatula and stir that up. The rye flour isn't dissolving as well as all-purpose would, but that's okay. This will get all mixed up when we add the flour. And if you hear Brody in the background, he's being a little bit of a stinker. He wants my attention. And we get the scale back, put the jar back on, tear it out to 0. And now I'm switching to all-purpose flour because when I opened this jar, I could tell already that the starter was becoming healthier and it didn't smell nearly as badly as it did out of the refrigerator. So I felt that we could switch to all-purpose flour at this point. I'm really sorry that the camera angle is incorrect and that I'm not centered. Be patient with me. I will get it. I'm very new to this. And I'm just stirring that up really, really good, making sure all the starter is mixed in with the new flour and water. And now it's time to scrape down the sides again and to make the starter level even as possible. There, I just showed you the consistency. It's like a brownie batter. And once again, I apologize for being off center. And I'm just tapping it down. And we're going to put the rubber band back on. Okay. And the lid loosely. And we're going to put that on top of my range hood. Okay, this is day 2, feeding 3. The starter more than doubled again. And I'm going to take 25 grams of it. I'm still not going to use 50 grams of it. It is smelling better, even better than the day before. And you'll notice that I'm using a metal spoon. There is this thing going around the sourdough community that you cannot use metal. And that's in regard to like a raw metal without a finish, like, I don't know, tin, aluminum. Your flatware, it's not a problem. You can use it. although you'll see it's not as efficient for stirring or scraping down the sides, but my spatula was nowhere to be found at this point, probably in the dishwasher. So I've added 50 grams of the filtered water again, and we're going to stir that up with our metal spoon as best we can. Get that all mixed in. It's nice and milky white. And next, let's add the 50 grams of all-purpose flour. We've got to zero the scale out again. And let's get that stirred up. This is where I was missing my spatula. Get that all incorporated. Scrape down the sides. I think I sped this part up. Just wipe down the jar a little bit. Replace the lid. And put the rubber band on. Put it back in its warm spot. Here's the next feeding. It's more than doubled again. And this is where I went completely haywire with my camera angle. And you can see my vacuum. So into a clean jar, I am adding 50 grams now of the starter. Because when I opened this starter, it smelled really good. Almost to the point I want it. And I added the 50 grams of water. I'm adding the 50 grams of flour and stirring that up again. Okay. And putting on the lid. Putting on the rubber band. It's like rinse and repeat. And I'll put that in a warm place. Here's our starter. This is going to be feeding number 4. And it turns out it's going to be the last feeding of the rehabilitation process. Starting out with a clean jar. I'm going to add 50 grams of the starter again. Now, all of the starter left in these jars, I have thrown away into the trash. Okay? Because it was acidic, why would I want to save it for starter recipes? I wouldn't. So I put it in the trash. And I'm adding 50 grams of the filtered water, room temperature. Never put starter down your drain. In fact, wipe out or wipe off everything with paper towels, and then you can wash an almost clean jar, because the starter will harden in your pipes and you'll have a plumbing problem eventually. And my house was built in 1939, and I am not chancing that. So I never put starter down the drain, and I wipe out everything very well with paper towels that has had starter in it. So like I said, this ends up being the last feeding to make the starter healthy. When I open it the next time, it is yeasty and smells warm and sweet, just like a loaf of bread. So I was very pleased that it only took 4 peak-to-peak feedings to get that starter healthy again. And I am going to be showing you the loaf that I bake in my next video. I'm just going to cover this, put the rubber band on. I want to thank you for joining me. I really enjoy doing this, and I hope that this has helped somebody and you can see my starter has almost tripled.